Part 1. The gathering stormed wind in Yakutia does not howl, it scrapes, tearing at the ears and pushing its way into the bones. At -71°C, the air itself becomes a slow-moving predator, hunting exposed skin with icy fangs. In the dim light of late morning, the nomad camp stirred like a waking beast. Heavy fur tents groaned under layers of snow, their seams lined with frost so thick it looked carved from quartz. Men emerged first, silent, their eyelashes glazed white, fur hoods drawn close. Each exhalation rolled out in dense clouds, immediately twisting away in the gale. They moved like figures from another century, thick boots wrapped in reindeer hide, belts weighted with bone-handled knives, shoulders cloaked in wolf and bear pelts. These were not men who hunted for sport. They hunted because hunger in this cold was as sharp as any blade. Today was not for deer or seal. Today was for something much bigger, something that could feed the entire settlement for weeks. Somewhere beyond the frozen ridges, a walrus colony had been spotted on the edge of sea ice in summer. Such a hunt would be dangerous enough, but in this bitter winter, with ice shifting and the cold crushing the body's will, it was a gamble with death. The hunt leader, a man named Mikal, gathered the group in the center of the camp. His voice was a low growl under the wind. They spoke of roots, ice thickness, and the possible aggression of the walrus bull. Mikal's hands, bare for only a moment, were red and cracked as he traced a rough map in the snow. Sled dogs waited nearby, muscles tense, steam pouring from their nostrils. They knew the signs this was not a simple journey. Their sleds were already loaded with harpoons tipped in sharpened steel, ropes thick as a man's wrist, and enough dried meat for 2 days. Should the ice take longer to yield its prize? The women worked in the shadows of the tents, packing extra fur blankets and binding them in sealskin. One, Mikal's wife, slipped a carved bone charm into the folds of his hood, an old talisman against the sea spirits. No one spoke of it aloud, but every hunter felt the weight of the journey in their chest. When the word came to move, it was sudden and without ceremony. Dogs lunged forward, sled runners screeched against hard ice, and the small caravan slid into the pale blue void beyond the camp. The village faded into a blur of smoke and snow behind them, replaced by the endless groan of shifting ice floes. Somewhere ahead, under layers of frozen silence, the walrus herd waited. Part 2. Into the white Wastelanthe sun, if it could be called that, hung low and pale in the southern sky, offering no warmth, only a thin smear of light. The air burned in the lungs, every inhale feeling like swallowing glass shards. The sled runners hissed over wine-packed snow, each push forward, accompanied by the rhythmic panting of the dogs. Their paws struck with muffled thuds, throwing up fine powder that instantly froze to their fur. The wilderness stretched in every direction, endless white broken only by jagged shards of ice jutting up like the ribs of some frozen leviathan. The silence was heavy here, no bird call, no rustle of branches, only the distant cracking of ice sheets moving under unseen currents. Every so often, a deep rumble would roll beneath their feet, a reminder that this entire world was shifting, alive in its own glacial way. Mikal led from the front, crouched low on his sled to cut the wind. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, not just for signs of walrus, but for danger, thin ice, hidden crevices, or the telltale shadow of a polar bear. At -71°C, the margin for error was razor thin. A single mistake could be the difference between returning with meat or never returning at all. The men rode in near silence, speaking only when necessary. Even words felt expensive in this cold. Every sound seemed to steal heat from the body. Behind them, the sleds carried the heavy hunting gear, spare furs, and bundles of driftwood collected months earlier for fires. Out here, nothing could be wasted. Every rope, every iron point, every scrap of hide had been repaired and reused a dozen times before. By midday, they reached the edge of the coastal ice. Here, the world changed. The flat whiteness gave way to a chaotic battlefield of frozen slabs, some stacked 2 or 3 meters high, others splintered into shards sharp enough to tear through boots. The dogs slowed, noses twitching, ears pricked. They could smell it now, salt and something musky, heavy, alive. The walrus herd was near. The hunters dismounted, leading the sleds by hand over the uneven ice. Every step was a test. The deep blue cracks underfoot spoke of thin patches where the sea churned just below. McCall stopped suddenly, kneeling to examine a wide track pressed deep into the snow. The marks were fresh, broad, sweeping grooves, from a massive body dragging itself across the ice. They moved in a crouch now, each man wrapping his face tighter against the wind. Ahead, the air carried faint sounds, low, guttural grunts, the slap of flippers on ice. The walrus were close enough to hear, but still hidden behind a ridge of ice hummocks. The hunters exchanged brief glances, the kind that needed no words. The plan was simple, but execution would be brutal. They would approach low from downwind, circle to block the herd's escape to open water, then target the largest bull, a massive, tusked giant that could weigh over 3,000 kilograms. It would take all of them working in perfect rhythm to bring it down without losing a man to the ice or the animal's fury. As the final light began to fade, they settled into a shallow depression, using the ice as a windbreak. The dogs lay curled together, frost coating their whiskers, their breathing slow and steady. No one started a fire, smoke could give them away. Instead, the hunters sat in silence, chewing on strips of frozen reindeer meat, eyes fixed on the shapes moving faintly in the distance. The night would be long and colder still, but tomorrow they would strike. Part 3. The hunt begins. Morning didn't so much arrive, as it simply became slightly less dark. The horizon glowed a faint pink, before fading into the pale blue of another frozen day. The hunters moved with slow, deliberate care, their joints stiff from the night's cold. Every buckle and strap on their fur clothing was checked twice. A single tear in the hide could mean frostbite in minutes. McCall signaled with a gloved hand, and the men fanned out, each sinking low, moving across the ice as if stalking ghosts. The walrus herd lay sprawled across a sheet of frozen sea, their massive bodies huddled together for warmth. Steam rose from their skin in great clouds that hung in the still air. From this distance, they looked like boulders, but the deep guttural bellows reminded the hunters they were very much alive. The biggest bull sat near the center, tusks curved like ancient ivory swords. He was the leader, the defender, and the prize. His hide was a deep scarred brown, thick with years of battles. Round him lay the rest, females and younger males, some rolling lazily, others shifting uneasily at the scent of strangers on the wind. At the hunter's path was a wide crescent, keeping downwind. Each man carried a harpoon as tall as himself, its iron head sharpened to a wicked point. Thick rawhide ropes trailed from each weapon, coiled neatly at their feet. These ropes were their lifeline. Once the harpoon struck, the walrus would thrash, and the ice itself could fracture beneath the struggle. They reached the final ridge before the herd. McCall's breath plumed in the cold as he raised his arm. 3 fingers. The men froze. Then, one by one, they slipped forward over the ridge, boots crunching softly in the snow. The first throw came from McCall himself. His harpoon sailed through the air in a slow, heavy arc, striking the bull just behind the shoulder. The bellow that followed shattered the frozen stillness. The entire herd erupted in chaos, bodies surging toward the water's edge. Ice splintered under their weight, snow flying in all directions. The other hunters hurled their weapons in quick succession, rawhide ropes snapping taut as they dug in their heels. The bull thrashed, his tusks gouging the ice, his eyes wild with fury. Steam poured from his nostrils, the air thick with his harsh cries. Every man leaned back with all his weight, boots slipping, the sound of rope creaking like a drumbeat. One hunter, Pavel, was nearly pulled off his feet as the bull lurched sideways, dragging 2 others toward a jagged crack in the ice. They shouted warnings, voices hoarse from the cold. McCall barked an order, and another man swung his axe, chopping a quick anchor hole into the ice to secure the rope. The bull's momentum slowed, but his power was terrifying. Minutes felt like hours. The walrus fought with a force that seemed impossible for something already wounded, his massive body thrumming with life. Blood dark and thick spilled across the ice, steaming in the frigid air. Yet even as it froze, the bull lunged again, nearly toppling McCall. Then, with one final bellow, the walrus collapsed onto his side, breath coming in heavy, ragged bursts. The herd had long since vanished into the sea, leaving only the echo of their retreat and the harsh panting of the hunters. No one celebrated. Not yet. The danger wasn't over thin ice, lurking predators, and the sheer weight of the animal still lay ahead. They stood in the cold, catching their breath, eyes scanning the horizon. Out here, survival meant patience, not pride. The next step would be harder still, getting 3,000 kilograms of meat and hide back across miles of treacherous ice before night fell again. And night, in this place, was always hungry. Part 4, The Feast and the Frost. The walrus lay silent now, its great chest no longer heaving. For a moment, the only sounds were the hunter's own breaths and the groan of shifting ice beneath them. Then Mikal gave the short, sharp whistle that meant, move fast, out here. Death could come from the cold as easily as from the beast's tusks. The men went to work immediately. Two stayed on watch with rifles, scanning the horizon for polar bears or packs of wolves that sometimes shadowed a kill. The others pulled curved skinning knives from their belts, their metal hilts wrapped in fur so bare fingers wouldn't stick and tear in the freezing air. Even through my layers, the cold bit deep as I knelt to watch. They began at the head, working in wide, practiced sweeps. The first cut was like unzipping a ship's sail tuff, thick hide that resisted the blade until the weight of the man behind it forced it open. Steam rose from the wound in heavy clouds, carrying with it a rich, oily smell that seemed to stick to my tongue. The men moved like parts of a single machine, one cutting, another pulling the hide back, others slicing deep into the fat thick, pale and solid in the cold. Every slab was lifted onto a waiting sled lined with more hides. The rawhide ropes that had bound their harpoons now lashed the meat securely. Mikal worked without pause, his breath frosting the fur around his hood. "We have hours," he told me without looking up. "Then the ice will break." His voice was matter of fact, but I could feel the urgency in every movement. It took nearly 2 hours just to remove enough meat to make the load worth the journey. They couldn't take all of it. The ice wouldn't allow it. Still, the sled sagged under the weight, the wooden runners creaking as if in protest. The return journey was a battle of its own. Each man took turns at the front, leaning into the sled's harness, boots scraping on the ice. The wind picked up, sharp and sudden, bringing with it a fine mist of snow that stung my eyes. The horizon blurred, and soon the only things visible were the dark shapes of the men ahead of me and the steady, rhythmic crunch of our steps. Several times, the sled caught on uneven ice, forcing everyone to stop and heave it free. Each pause brought a new wave of cold, creeping into our muscles like slow poison. My hands ached inside my mittens, my eyelashes crusted with frost. I understood then why Mikal had said nothing was won until we were home. When the first outline of the settlement appeared, a faint line of smoke against the pale sky, something in my chest loosened. We reached the village just as the light began to fade again, the sled runners hissing as they slid onto packed snow between the wooden houses. The welcome was quiet but warm. No one shouted. Instead, people came silently from their homes, faces hidden under fur hoods, to help unload. The meat went into a communal storage hut, the hide laid out to freeze flat before later tanning. That night, I was invited to share in what they called the survival feast, in a round, low-roofed dwelling lit by the yellow glow of seal oil lamps. I sat cross-legged among hunters and elders. Bowls of steaming walrus stew were passed around, rich with fat and root vegetables pulled from deep storage. The air was thick, with the scent of meat, smoke, and the faint tang of salt. Mikal sat across from me, his face shadowed, his eyes reflecting the firelight. He raised his bowl to the ice. He said, "It gives, it takes, and it teaches." I tasted the stew, heavy and warming, and felt its heat spread through me. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen sea, rattling the walls. But in that moment, surrounded by these people in the heart of the coldest land I had ever known, I felt something like safety. They had faced the storm, the hunt, and the endless. White and survived. For them, it was life as usual. For me, it was a week that would mark me forever. In the Siberian wilderness, survival isn't an act of courage. It's simply the only way to live. And the people who call it home are not just survivors, they are masters of the cold.